Okay, great. It says recording for you.
Excellent. Yep.
Cool. Me too.
Good
All right.
to see everybody. I'm so glad that we're doing this because it feels like bringing us literally full circle, full cycle to share, I guess what's been going on since our last conversation about methodologies. And I've loved reading about your inquiries in process, your beings, and how things have shifted.
Yeah, so since we last spoke, I think I sort of shifted to doing neighborhood, and then while I'm still like walking with my neighborhood, because for the course we've shifted more toward like reading and theory, I've stopped uploading notes on that. So I hope that's okay with you all.
Mm-hmm.
Which has been the theory has been really interesting. There's sort of been a thread throughout, and now I'm sort of narrowing in on the parts of the class that are kind of the intersection between cooperative and panpsychic, in terms of like what the possibilities are for using each of them. Like I think by using cooperative inquiry, you're challenging a lot of the like hierarchical notions that set up both academia and our like extractive society, but also by using a panpsychist approach, like you're doing that same sort of breakdown. So that's been really exciting to me, like where the intersection is. And that's kind of where my head's at. I'll pause and hear where you all are, and then I'd love to talk and maybe talk about touch and whatever else you read, if folks want to.
Well, I just want to say quickly, and I would love to even hear more from you about the way you're seeing each as its own methodology. Obviously, they're presented as distinct methodologies, and we're interweaving them, interbreathing them, whatever. And I really like thinking of panpsychism as not only as a theoretical framework, but the methods that we've been invited to try out. Because in some ways, I see it in ways both. Like it's a paradigm. It's a theoretical framework. It has its own methods, or invitation for methods. And I think what's so cool about the bringing the cooperative aspect to the panpsychism is, that seeing what methods arise through our engagements, which I think is like, it's both a little scary on some level when there's no like really clear, like, here's how you approach, the living cosmos, as opposed to how clear the methods are for cooperative inquiry. Or at least there's so much flexibility and creativity in the cooperative inquiry, invitations to, lots of that reflection. But there's still like a method that we can, a point of departure for the method. So anyway, I thank you for saying that, what each of the possibilities are.
Yeah, I kind of find them like going toward each other. Like one is like, here's sort of in cooperative inquiry, there's like, here's how to do cooperative inquiry. And then as you do it, you sort of like expand into maybe not necessarily panpsychism, but expand into like a more distributed sense of like knowledge creation, which to me like aligns a lot with a more distributed sense of like mind, what has mind. And then from panpsychism, it's like you take this whole worldview, you distribute it first, and then from there you're like, oh, like maybe cooperative inquiry is kind of like the way to do it. So I feel like they sort of, just like as you said, like one is coming from something and expanding out, and one is kind of like starting expanded and going towards something. But I felt that they really like talk to each other a lot during this course, for me at least.
Yeah, that's during this course, I think I'm leaning more towards the pluralist kind of approach of incorporating traditional science with some of these new ideas. At least that's what it's kind of doing for me. Not invalidating any of the more traditional ways of using empirical evidence or measurement, but also adding some of the question to how how those things are interpreted and used. and especially with the idea of validity. With science, a lot of people enjoy saying things are invalid, but there's sometimes no more basis to that, rather than just the feelings of the researcher. So that's kind of at least where I'm at the moment.
Mm.
I would add, Ian, that like the actual traditional ways of knowing might be more in line with the, like traditionally scientific sounds like what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Like acknowledging that traditional for us in our lives maybe has been scientific, but like traditional for like the long history of humanity and for a lot of cultures, like traditional is not scientific, but sounds more like what this is, which goes to like pluralism. Like there's so many ways of knowing things.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, I wonder too if knowing's even a pursuit that really has any certainty whatsoever. But that's another out there kind of thought I've been having.
Mm-hmm. Well, one intersection of the panpsychism and the cooperative for me is relational, like the relationship. Not only, you know, is cooperative inquiry, like it's research done not on people, right, but with and for them. And so it really requires a kind of encounter um, as a researcher with other researchers and with the researched, whatever the researched is or are. Um, so I'm thinking that this panpsychism, you know, that we got to play with is, I don't know, subliminally like showing me about the respect and like how to even how to approach humans, how to, you know, I think it's been very subtle. I don't know if that was the method to the madness, but my sense is to bring that openness and curiosity and wonder and not projecting that we've been doing with, you know, plants and animals and rivers. And can you imagine if we actually treated human beings that way?
I like your critique of projecting. I feel like people do that quite often. They put their own feelings and their own ego into so much. It kind of morphs this idea of certainty that may or may not truly exist. Like when I used to work at a museum, I would build exhibits, some of which were built with like optical illusions and psychological illusions that create false movement, things like that, to make people question their senses, like and how valid those sensory, like your vision, your touch, truly, how much certainty are those things really giving you? And every single time I observed that people would, because I made it in a way that people could, I wouldn't penalize them, but some people would pick up the illusion and hold it closer to their face somehow, that would validate their certainty of whatever they were thinking. So it's just an interesting idea you bring up, projection, and I feel like that's some form of it where they project this feeling of certainty still based on the same senses, in a place where those senses are the thing that causes the question to happen. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it makes sense to me. Actually,
okay.
Another paper that I'm writing for my other course, I'm writing quite a bit about this divide between like empiricism and social construction in a way that is like there are these binaries that are, you know, create these camps. They're like these scientific, you know,
Oh yeah.
warring factions kind of. So I'm really aiming for like an integral approach there because,
Love it.
oh, it's like, you know, and it's interesting because they both have very, very clear, I mean, very thoughtful, you know, kind of arguments. Like I was just looking at this one very short article, which is actually called, you know, In Debate. And it's like one is like completely social constructionist and has a whole long list of reasons why, you know, the scientific community is missing the boat. And then the scientific person, to his credit, at least is open to seeing social influences. Like he used the word influences um, and attitudes of people, um, but there's like very little common ground. And I'm like, there's
Yeah.
got to be. I mean, we're not gonna. How you gonna make a difference for people, you know, or show what's so if it's, you know, I mean, I guess they could both be have merit, but I
Right.
think it's important to find, I'm very much about like common ground. I don't know if that's growing up in a house where my parents were always fighting and I wanted everybody to be nice to each other.
No, I totally agree. I think a lot of science, even between different sciences, which when I was at the state, there would be different scientists. I work with biologists, chemists, and everybody thought their method was superior. It's like this golden language, and it's like, no, we need all of these things. That's why, they're there. I don't go totally the social construction route because I feel like we're going to get carried away by things that can't be measured. We're not really able to prove in a lot of ways. And I say that as an anthropologist.
Mhm.
But on the other side of that, if you just start going into these systematic languages like math, those are also highly biased and variable to the person doing them. So it's
Oh, really?
oh,
Oh,
absolutely. Math's not a science, it's a
like,
language.
oh, okay. I thought
Yeah,
math is like, it's so. This is what's so. But guys, you're right. There are theorems, which I guess are theories, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Math is a lot of people, not a lot. I should some people think that math is this like super objective.
Mhm.
This plus this always equals this, and there's ways to prove mathematically that 2 plus 2 does not equal 4. It's a language. It's not a science at all.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's yeah. Anyway, it gives a strong illusion of objectivity, and it's helpful for expressing certain things. It's
Well,
not objective.
I think that something that has come up for me in this class on like this discussion you're having between like projecting and objectivity, I'm hearing a lot of like what excuse me, what is like subjectivity and like how much does it matter? Should we acknowledge it? Like how should we try and remove ourselves from it or like what? And to me, I think that the panpsychist approach sort of dissolved that for me. Like you can be a being in relation with another being, and like your beinghood doesn't make the other being's beinghood less or more or different. Like the living cosmos sort of gets rid of the need to be objective or subjective. I guess it creates subjectivity in all beings. So there no longer needs to be sort of the false premise of objectivity. Because while I see where you're coming from about like projecting, especially, I think it can be really tempting or easy to do with ontopoetics and poetics because it's poetry. Like it's to a certain extent like a projection, but I think that acknowledging like I am a person, these are my experiences, this is my sort of language that I'm coming to this with, this is my mythology that I'm coming to this with,
mhm.
and then receiving whatever you receive, it's going to be filtered through your mythology, your worldview, your language, whether you like it or not. So coming forward and saying like this is what it is, I think can help place ourselves like within the mythology and like within the living cosmos. And Freya Matthews talked about that a little bit when she was with us in class about like how do you know if it's like a poetic experience, like am I just projecting like three birds in the sky means something to me. And she was saying like how else can you expect to be communicated with except in a language that like means something to you. And I'm not sure if I've really like fleshed that out all the way, but
Sure.
it sort of stuck with me as like we want to avoid like pure projection,
Right.
but also there's sort of this like interplay between like my mind and the mind of the world around me, like my matter and the matter of the world around me. I don't not exist, and like I wouldn't want to not exist. um so that's just something that's come up for me in terms of like subjectivity and and engagement like as a being myself. um I don't know if I got us. I feel like I was talking at maybe like the point before you made Ian, but that was just something that I thought of
Yeah.
while you were talking.
And definitely, I think that is a good awareness to have as a researcher. But I don't think that it would discount the idea of empiricism, because things like chemistry, if you mix this chemical with this, no matter what the person feels or thinks, it's going to usually have the outcome that's measured and will turn out that way. So I think that both are valid, but I think somehow there needs to be an integration of those type of mindsets.
Yeah. And I think for me, like empirical data, like you were saying, like math, science, like, yes, possibly if you do these two things, this third thing will happen no matter what I'm feeling. But the fact that I decided to do those two things and I decided to do them at this time of day and I decided to write about them in this way, I think that like even where empirical knowledge exists, it can't be like understood or presented without subjectivity. And so I think there needs to be both. And like we can't ever really assume that anything is purely empirical, because like those two chemicals didn't tell us about themselves. Like someone like a person explained it in a language. And so I think that there's always sort of like this
there's
other
a great
thing. Yeah. So like having the multiple perspectives is useful.
The vocabulary that's sort of the accepted, the vocabulary, the parameters of the knowledge. I really am loving and also what you said before about you can be a being and your beinghood doesn't, make my beinghood less of a being. That mutuality, it also brings to me, it's like this idea, and maybe this is the empiricist idea or the objective idea, that there is a right way to be.
Right.
And like I'm studying in my inquiry, I'm looking at, I guess more like the constructions of mental illness, or particularly not mental illness, but kind of more neurodevelopmental disorder, ADHD, but also disability and normality. And, so who gets to say what is the norm, or who gets to say what are the parameters of where somebody is no longer, healthy, and like, obviously we know that you can tell when a being or a creature is more healthy and attuned and in harmony with its environment. And we can tell when it's, ailing. I think, but with people deciding, like who gets to say, and so, also about your bees, when I was really, really upset when you were telling me about your bees, and you were just like, this is nature, like this is natural. And I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. And yes, it's sad, right? That loss. But also kind of seeing it as that's the way of nature. I mean, I've been reading a lot and studying and getting into Buddhism, and this whole thing about impermanence and death. It's like, that's not like a problem. It's just, that's how it is.
Yeah, it would be sad for them to never die. Like a part of their existence is them dying. And like, it was kind of sad for me to have them die. And that's like an attachment that I had to them. But yeah, like they're a part of something. They're not themselves by themselves, right? They're like a part of this other thing. I've been writing thanks to Weber. I was reading his death, chapter 3 about death. And he talks about metabolism as being life death. Like the way that we exist is like we eat things and then we destroy the Krebs cycle. You eat it, the ATP goes into your muscles, you burn it off as heat. And like in order to keep existing, we're literally like burning through ourselves. Like we have to die to live.
Right. We're not just the organisms that we're ingesting,
but like our literal cells, like how they go is that they like take an electron from themselves to use, and then they like get it. It's like fine, they like keep going. But that really hit me, especially with my bees. Like they made honey, which I'm eating. So now I'm like also becoming and then killing the honey that they made, and then becoming and then killing myself. And I just felt like the death chapter really, and the metabolism portion of it in particular, was really like, it made me feel like eating the honey was like such a sacred act, and like I became the bees. And at the same time, like I was like, oh my God, every time I eat anything, like it should feel like a sacred act. Like it's such this like reciprocal thing. So yeah, that really came up for me around like how to engage with the idea of things dying. Luckily, they left me some more of them, and it really, yeah, it was just a really beautiful way to talk about like on an individual level and then also on like an ecosystem level. Like there has to be sort of this churn in order for it to keep living. If everyone just kept living, there would be like so many people. So like, there has to be like
right, it would be healthy or safe. Wow. Yeah, I did read a little bit of the death chapter, but we had decided to focus on the touch, and it was like every single sentence that this man writes is a little prayer on some level.
Yeah.
I was very moved by it. You know, touching even into the science, like that with touch, it's like we can't not like everything is like attracting or attracted. First, I was the erotics of it took me a little while. So I figured, what is he going for here? Like I understand that there's a sensuality just with the, I guess, sort of the magnitude and the mystery of it all. It's like, whoa, you know, but you know, molecules of water clinging and like there would be life without that. We're made up so much of that. We're earth, water, fire, and air. Yeah, so it was, I approached the chapter on touch thinking it was going to be, oh, wow, finally something that's going to be connected to like mammals, right? To my touching these soft kitty cats and, you know, something about the human need for touch and connection. And I thought it was going to be more about like attachment. And it was very not that. It was, I mean, it was that and more. You know, the rocks and the water and the, you know, the energy that is like so part of every interaction. So yeah, I'm going to need to do some more, you know, I want to regard it again at this new place in the course. But I did do what we planned was to go back into my own body of literature that I had put on the side. And I read about sort of human nature has certain vocabulary. Well, there's some harmonious kind of vocabulary around cat nature, and they do use the term personality, but sometimes it's put in quotes. But that they really do have their own distinct, you know, there's cat nature, and then there's the individual cats. And it traced a lot of it to the sensitive period when little kittens, either with their mothers or when they're taken from their mothers, if there's human, they're much more likely to approach and be sociable if in that sensitive period they're touched and held and handled. It's more intense when it's just one handler. But if it's in a family, like in mine, we had lots of us like holding and touching the kitties. My cats are very, very sociable. And it talked about, you know, these sort of almost this little matrix. Some cats are averse and avoidant and hide, and others are pursuing. And some are more nervous and some are more like relaxed. And so I feel very gratified that my cats were in that sociable approach and like people and you know, so it was just fascinating to find out at least some of the shaping influences of that. And then I read another piece that talked about the human cat human relationship from the perspective of people comparing their thoughts and feelings about their cats compared to their thoughts and feelings about their humans. It's very interesting about what people, the needs that people see as getting met from cats compared to with humans, and unconditional love and you know, that's more from cats than people get. I feel like they get more from cats than they get from people. I thought that was interesting. So I may touch on some of the finest, but I was very glad that I held off on reading the literature before that, you know, those first few cycles. I'm glad that I kind of saved it for the end because it didn't color my perceptions and my engagement. And then there's one more book that I was I didn't really like it as well, but it's because it's more through the lens of problems and problem behavior, but which is I may relate to it in some ways, just in terms of my looking at mental illness or mental health. It's called The Cat Who Cried for Help: Attitudes, Emotions, and the Psychology of Cats. But the veterinarian really talks about like most of these like challenging cases and problem animals, mostly. So it wasn't through the lens of the typical. It was really, but you know, how to help people and their cats do it together. It's almost like couples therapy. You can't work with a cat without their people. So in a way, it was like a panpsychic. It had a very very subtle nuance, but that it is so relational. So
I feel like it's really beautiful what you said about like cats as their kittens. Like if you touch them, they like become more sociable. And I feel like that actually aligns really well with Weber's ideas about like touch imparting something on everything that is touched. And because it's so easy for us to think of cats as having personalities, as having like a mind of some kind, it's really easy to see like your human mind through your touch, then being felt through the cat's touch, sort of shapes and creates the cat's mind. It's like a mind matter mind chain. And I think that that's just really like beautiful and also cute to think about. And allows for, I don't know, maybe getting rid of the dualism between like just mind, just matter, but thinking of like on a 4 scale, there's like 2 minds and 2 matters here. And then they're like in a quadrant, all sort of equal. And like they're all shaping each other. Like how you feel is affecting how much or how often or how like aggressively or nicely you're touching your cat.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And the cat feels is then shaping its personality. And that's like your brain is talking to its brain. I just feel like that's really amazing.
You know what? It is actually, because I think people are so much more, and I didn't think of myself as a cat person. I didn't really want a cat or cats. I ended up with 2. I grew up with dogs periodically, but I just didn't have really a favorable impression. But what I'm seeing is when cats are kind or they're nice or they approach, then you're like, oh, then you're like, you feel relaxed around them, and then you're sweet. And then they're like, oh, well, that person's really relaxed around me and they're sweet. So then I'm going to approach them more. And, you know, what came to me when you were saying that about the shaping the brain in a way, it's like, we're like regulating each other's central nervous systems on some, like, I think that's why people have like these therapy animals or
and like through touch, like it wouldn't happen if you weren't there wasn't like the matter to matter component, and then both of your minds are like behaving differently. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, on one level of reality, atoms can be in 2 places at once. So the separation of matter in a quantum physics.
Wait. How's that? How does that work?
Well, so with atomic science, atoms are more seen as possibilities than actual objects. So distance to some in atomic reality, because if you were to look at reality in levels, which I find this is one of the reasons I'm in this program, not just a purely, imperialistic, not imperialistic, I'm sorry, empirical science-based program, is because consciousness is an interesting thing. It's almost interdimensional in a way, because there's all these levels to what we think of as reality, and we're kind of a superposition. So with atomic reality, everything's just kind of clouds of particles swirling around each other, and these particles are in multiple places at the same time. If you ever look up, they've done it on electron microscopes, and I've actually seen what my professor told me was, and from what I could understand, basically an atom in 2 places at once. And it's mind bending.
But we're made of that too, right? We're made of atoms, so
everything is, everything. The table, my hands, this glass that I'm looking at, my cell phone, battery charges, which is a poetic interpretation of reality, because there's no really such thing as charge. It's just negative is electrons moving one way, and positive is them moving the other, or in different concentrations rather. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing with, what we're talking about is we're talking about the feelings, the constructions, but also the empirical science of like cat psychology, for example. That's somewhat empirical. Not to say that's superior, it isn't, in my opinion, but I feel it's all necessary. If we go too far in one of the directions, for example, empiricism, we kind of lose our humanity, and it just becomes this sacrificing self for system, which is insane to me. But you go too far the other way, it's becoming so touchy feely. It's almost kind of, it could go any direction. There's not really a whole lot of coherence to it. So I kind of think that this idea of integration, pluralism, you know, a lot of different words for what I'm kind of finding is the same thing. You know, what I kind of see it as, which is going to sound a little crazy, is a face with 1,000 eyes, and if you use just 5 of them, you're not going to see very much. But if you use all of them, you have 1,000 eyes. So that's kind of the way, at least, that I can think to communicate it. And that, honestly, not to go too far off, but in my paper, I'm debating looking into the physics of panpsychism, the people who are arguing that particles are conscious, using double slit, using the water experiments where the molecules get affected by the people projecting, different meaning to that word, of course, you know, and different experiments such as, I don't know if you guys have read Deutsch's book, The Brain That Fixes Itself.
I'm very interested too. I haven't, but it's on
another kind of interesting thing of consciousness and matter not necessarily being the same thing, but definitely connected and flexible. So a lot of scientists will argue consciousness is a byproduct, an illusion, a product of some threshold of complexity, which there's this experiment out there that actually shows that mold can measurably learn. So that argues against that. There's another experiment out there, if you're ever really bored, single-celled organisms actually are put through the equivalent of a maze, and they get faster every time. So that hints they might be learning, which is supposedly impossible. So there's some really interesting stuff out there, but it's from people who don't just look at the data and just think, hey, objectivity, mathematics, woo, STEM. But instead try to bend and question, I guess, in my opinion, the code, the source code to all of these scientific ideas. So anyway, that's
so cool. Well, you were saying before that atoms are more seen as possibilities.
Yeah, but
we're possibilities.
Yeah, reality is not quite a set thing from a lot of different perspectives. It's a flexible. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to tell you what reality is, but that's just something that I've kind of integrated into my idea of existence and consciousness, which if you're ever really, again, bored, David Chalmers, The Hard Problem of Consciousness, really great thing to read.
Yeah, I saw a one of his, like, there's a presentation, he gave a TED talk and then some other stuff on YouTube. He talks about panpsychism, but a little bit differently than Freya Matthews.
So his approach is one that I really like, and if you guys, I don't, again, I think you're a little, you're both not like to the end of the program, right?
No, I'm coming up the first half of my program.
Okay, I thought I remembered you saying. I just didn't want to assume. If you can, Leslie Combs is a teacher here. He's actually my favorite professor of, except for May, maybe. Him and May are probably like my 2 most influential people I've learned from here. He actually is like a hard scientist, like he's crunch like mathematical data. That was his thing. But he teaches a class called Consciousness in the Brain. And also
I'm taking Intro to Consciousness in the spring.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so he does a lot of what we were calling in this class pluralism. He takes these ideas of panpsychism, but also shows the science to how they could be valid and even in the scientific world, which is really cool. He'll give you amazing readings. Like, he's a really great teacher. I don't know who his aide will be, but if you guys can take his classes, please, take them. He's awesome.
Yeah, I'm taking the first one, and we'll see about next year. But
cool.
And Heather, yeah, I know you're in the anthropology program. Is that?
We can take classes from other stuff, so I'll definitely keep an eye out for it. What you were saying about atoms, Ian, in Weber, he says the atom is a relationship between different likelihoods of energy concentration. Its shape at any given moment is essentially the snapshot of a particular configuration of these relations, which I think gets at the wave particle thing in a way that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's a less, yeah, it makes sense.
Also, I don't know if you've listened to this yet, but one of the pieces of reading, listening that we were offered for this class is, I think it's by Sheldrake. It's the Is the Sun Conscious YouTube.
I did watch that.
And it sounds a lot like what you're talking about. So that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
It's very good. And one of the things I really, really liked about his discussion of sort of this interplay between what we can think of as being very woo-woo, like, is the sun conscious, like, okay, but then he's actually like basing it in like a real like understanding of the science of it, which I want a little woo-woo and a little science, but it's nice to hear from a scientist. And the way he was saying, like, our minds are like all the possibilities, and then our matters are which of the possibilities are happening right now, like the difference between like the ongoing versus the snapshot. I think of it as like the preterite or the imperfect. I don't know if any of you like learned Romance language, but like one is like something that's ongoing, and then one is like at this very minute, that's what it is. So yeah, just his conception of like what he explained really well for me, how that physics problem like enters into the mind matter problem, and how it can sort of be solved if you just allow for mind existing outside of the human, which is sort of like a hot take. I really like the way he explained it.
Like more scientific dualism.
Yeah.
But it's mind with a capital M, like mind that permeates all, or are there discrete individual minds? That's it.
You know, I'm not sure what his take is. I don't know if he did it like to the atomic level or the being level. Like, does cat have a mind, or does, you know, electron or neutron have mind? I don't know which one of those he was talking about. Ian, do you remember?
I don't. It's kind of building off of that. When he started kind of focusing heavily on the mechanical particles themselves, there's a few other scientists out there who have a little bit different of a take on that. The atoms themselves may not be where the mind or consciousness is, but it could be the space between, which is kind of unknown. And as far as like separation between minds, it may be similar to atoms. There may not truly be a separation. It may just be, again, superpositions on the same sphere. Again, not an actual sphere, it's just a mnemonic device, because I don't know what the shape of that would be, if there even is one, but it's trying to relay that in a way.
Well, one way I heard it, but I don't know if it's I'm tracking here, but that black holes used to be seen as an absence, and they're actually seen more as a presence. And I don't know the sciences of it, but this idea of, like you say, the space between everything is really, maybe it's all the same.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Mind, or, you know.
Sheldrake talks about the space between, and as he was talking about it, I was on a walk, and all of a sudden I felt like there is so much space between like me and the things around me, and like, you know, even when you're touching something, like there's both space between you and that thing.
Oh yeah.
And you kind of are touching that thing because of the switching positions, which I think is just like, once you start thinking about that in your existence, like everything becomes sort of like glittery. I felt like everything suddenly was like really, I suddenly was in relation to everything around me, because if the mind is the space between me and that thing, like everything exists in that relation, which I thought was really amazing.
And we can't see the air we're breathing, but it is very, very full of nitrogen and oxygen. And I mean, it's stuff. It's not nothing, right? The space that we're seeing is, you know, we're inhaling it, and other people are inhaling what we're exhaling. I mean, but right. So there is,
and an idea out there too. Again, not to sorry to just you kind of gave me all these thoughts at once, but if you look into metaphysics, which is somewhat discredited, somewhat not, uh, there's an idea out there, and I actually think it's a very good idea. There's no really such thing as empty space. It's all filled with forces. So, for example, the moon and the tides, there's hundreds of thousands of miles of empty space, quote unquote, between those things. Yet the moon influences tides via gravity, which is a force. Um, so the idea that an object at a distance can act on another uh, would kind of hint that there may be something else going on, which again alludes to my idea of not my idea, it's one I've taken from others, but not taken, but I don't know, whatever the better word for that is. Uh, is it's more of like like consciousness is almost more of a gravitational force. It's the space between, and not to go into too much detail. Hopefully, no one will get me in trouble. But on a ayahuasca journey with a shaman, yeah, it was that's a whole nother story. But anyway, the idea of the space between was something that went into a very interesting place that sort of bent the parameters of science as I know them even today. Um, and some of those visions were actually shared between me and about six other people.
Oh, wow.
However, yeah, the idea of the world between worlds is a pretty strong principle in a lot of shamanism, which is kind of an interesting thing because science is sometimes starting to walk that route, especially some parts of cultural and sociocultural anthropology. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of like plurality, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
like there are so many ways of knowing something and also of describing it, and like the language and experience of like again like kind of creates that piece of knowledge for you and for other people. Like six people shared the same thing and then were able to sort of describe it in a similar way because you have literally a shared language.
Right.
And so that's like how you accessed this shared knowledge.
Right.
And then that you would have had shared knowledge without that language as well, but it would have been different because you couldn't have like talked about it. And I think that just thinking about that example really pulls up like how do we understand things and how do we like share understanding, and that sort of troubles the idea that there's any unitary truth, while at the same time pointing to that there might be a unitary truth. Like all of you had the same experience, which seems like that experience was like true, capital T, but at the same time, like you can't be sure of how similar it was. It was filtered through language, it was filtered through all these other things. So like in that way, it was really like multiple. Just excited about thinking about like how we can engage with shared ideas and like even shared like experiences of mind, which I think is a really sort of powerful place to get knowledge.
Even going beyond that, like why does that make you feel quote unquote glittery? Like what is that? Is that not something worthy of thinking more about? Is that a language or an inkling or an intuition to another facet of this pluralistic, dynamic truth? Not to say there is no truth, but it may not be the stagnant thing that we may think it is. We, in terms of people who may think like I used to, not everyone, because I don't know everyone's minds.
Well, so what you're touching on for me here, both of you, talking about relational, this learning and this awareness. We didn't prepare this, but it did occur to me to ask both of you, and maybe for us to muse a little, how are coming together in this cooperative inquiry with our three very different types, or more than three really, types of beings, right? So initially you were thinking of wanting to engage with a river, Heather, and then you connected up with your bees and then your neighborhood. And for you, Ian, finding your way on your river. And for me, I almost was feeling like, oh goodness, why didn't I choose, something in the, the green world out there or whatever, because this is about, really having more caring compassion for the environment. And we're thinking about the environmental crisis. And like, it's interesting, I chose my pussycats that live in my house. And Did I make some sort of a mistake, in terms of like, feeling more like environmental consciousness and, this feeling of care. What this has done for me is feeling like I'm one of the mammals, they're mammals, there's something I read, which I'm going to share in my paper. We share something like 90% of our DNA with a chimpanzee, and like, I don't know, maybe it's like 40 or more with a banana. Right? I was like, whoa, with a banana. Life, just the fact that we are life and life force. So anyway, I thought it might be interesting to muse how we've grown, what we've learned somewhat, in this little bit of time, having the three of us coming together from, I guess we've read each other's, some of each other's reflections and talk together here. I don't know what would be an honoring way of, kind of closing this cycle. I know it's, reflection, and then going out and having some action and then reflecting again. And here we are coming back to reflect. I'm just thinking what would be a nice way to honor our learning. I mean, I think we've definitely been doing that, but.
Yeah.
I can think of, for each of you, something that you have really helped me to think through in this work. So I'm happy to offer that as something. First of all, great conclusion, right on time, bringing us in full circle. But Ian, it's been really great to hear when we talk here, and then also reading through your work, the plurality perspective that you bring, and particularly around you bring a skepticism that I think is really rigorous. You don't just accept anything. And you brought a scientific lens, which I don't think I would have thought as much about the physics, metaphysics component, but especially around you literally being on the river, and that meaning that you are also kind of the river, because of the matter to matter, the touch, that has been just very cool for me to have that experience from you. So I really appreciate that. And then Lisa Joy, your engagement with full force engagement with the panpsychic methodology, how do we engage beings? We come up with meditation, we come up with an invocation. Your sort of seeing you do that helped me to feel less oh my God, how do I engage with a being? I could sort of get on board with that emotionally, but I didn't know what the steps were. And so I really appreciated the way that you did that with your work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Could I go as well? And thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm glad my skepticism is appreciated. I try not to come off, which I constantly worry about. Yeah, Heather, definitely wanted to thank you. I tend to get the kind of a tunnel vision, especially with trained reactions to certain things, which I've kind of figured, I think, is a trigger from being scientifically trained to an extent. So it kind of rebroadens, for lack of a better, not better, more of a quantitative explanation. It's instead of rather the tunnel vision of the mind's eye, it kind of relaxes and rebroadens the vision. So my peripheral, trying to think of the word, kind of like a mnemonic peripheral comes back. So thank you for that. And then Lisa, your kind of vision with connectivity, sort of this idea of unification and utilizing, I don't want to say plurality, but your approach of just, I'm trying to think of a good word. It's almost sage-like in a way, where you kind of know when to be silent and sort of absorb, but also have others following your example. So thank you for that, if that makes sense.
Oh, well, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Well, I've grown so much from both of you. I mean, I think this is just a really fantastic approach to learning. Um, so, Heather, you have a way. This is in my experience of taking the complexity and all of the various parts and pieces that we're bringing, and you just clearly like integrate. You integrate them. You see them. You can the big picture, as well as the sensitivities. And what I just was thinking about just now is like this idea of like you weren't studying A B, you were studying a system. And it really struck me how um, to be able to see that there's a nature of systems and and there to be able to see that. And I anyway, it just struck me how I think you also do that with knowledge and engage that way with in knowledge. So that's just really been a joy.
That really means a lot to me.
Yeah, and Ian, when you first talked about like wanting to be right on the river, really, like Heather just touched on it, it's through like direct experiencing um, and curiosity, and just there was like a desire to um, just be game, like to go and encounter um, and trust and see what happens. I mean, are you an archaeologist or an anthropologist? What is your role?
So I'm kind of a multidisciplinary.
Yeah.
I have experience with paleontology. My degrees are in cultural anthropology, bioanthropology, and also archaeology.
Okay,
So
I figured.
I've done work in all of those fields, and then also a little bit in psych and a little bit by proxy in chemistry and some physics. So it's been a strange, not to quote the Grateful Dead, but it's definitely been a long, strange trip.
You engage directly and with a lot of zest, and
Thank you.
I mean that's what you do in your work, right? You dig in and dive
Oh
deep,
yeah,
find stuff and make meaning from that. So
do that hobby
I think
too
you've
and
been
blow
doing
stuff up constantly. Sorry.
yeah, I think you've been doing that with this knowledge too. And then when you shared with us what your inquiry was, I was like, whoa, you're studying like the American dream, and it was so different than than your excavating um, artifacts. Now you're excavating um, in a way growth and human evolution and happiness or something, right? So people's self um, actualization.
Mhm.
So anyway, I really appreciate that. I see you did that in this inquiry too with this stuff.
Not to
So,
talk too much, but
Yeah.
what I've seen is self-actualization and happiness really aren't that complicated and really haven't changed very much in the time periods I've seen them, and those go back, to the beginning of farming. So I don't know. I don't
yep.
know why I felt the need to say that, but it's, it's out there, I guess.
Well, I have a sense that however we bring this work or this knowledge into our scholarship or into our work, I think I can speak for myself here. This has been a surprise. I've gotten a lot of just fresh energy and life that I'm looking at my inquiry in some really kind of new ways. I'm both very intrigued to bring a cooperative approach to my research, but I'm now feeling like both like it's a lot and there's so much unknown. So I'm going to hold it as an open question and keep reading and learning about it. I even had this kind of highfalutin idea of like, maybe I'll just have a research team of like 6 people, but each of us will lead, focus groups with like 100 people, so we could bring many, many, many people
Why
and many
not?
voices. Um, and I don't want it to get too unwieldy, but I do see there's a lot of possibilities in knowledge creation and then bringing the panpsychic. It's just really just that, you know, that open stance. I love that Freya was talking about um, of just really being present and aware and not seeing ourselves as the center of it all.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how you integrate any of this knowledge.
I'm curious to see how you guys integrate as well. And Lisa, if you can see it, you can do it. So if you want to create a research team, go do it.
Well, you already told me I'm like I'm made of atoms, right? On possibility. So
yeah, you can do anything your mind can see. You just have to figure out the mechanics. I have faith that you can do whatever it is your appeals to you most.
yeah.
And that's not a veneer statement. That I do truly believe that.
Cool. Well, I hope we can do this again in some other way, you guys, because it's just been really lovely, and I'm excited to keep hearing about your learning. And let's have a reunion and touch base again.
That'd be
Yeah,
great.
that sounds great. I'm gonna pause the recording or stop the recording, and then I have a logistics question that's like boring, so you don't need to